The dust rose in small clouds beneath the hooves of the cattle as they made their way through the narrow pass between the red canyon walls. Thomas Wade sat tall in his saddle, his weathered hat pulled low against the afternoon sun, watching the herd move with the practiced eye of a man who had spent more years with animals than people. He was 35 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older, carved there by wind and worry and the weight of choices made in the unforgiving light of the western frontier. The town of Redemption Springs sat in a valley where the prairie met the mountains, a collection of weathered buildings that had grown up around a reliable water source and the dreams of men who believed they could carve civilization from wilderness. Thomas had arrived there 7 years ago with nothing but a horse, a worn saddle, and a reputation for being the kind of man who would help a stranger fix a broken wagon wheel in the pouring rain without asking for payment or even giving his name. He worked odd jobs at first, helping ranchers with difficult horses, mending fences, delivering supplies to homesteaders living in isolated cabins miles from town. He never asked for much, and he never turned anyone away. The townsfolk had come to rely on him in the way people rely on the sunrise, taking his presence for granted while also finding comfort in its constancy. When Old Man Peterson's barn caught fire, Thomas was the first one there, running into the smoke to lead the terrified horses to safety. When the widow Martinez needed help bringing in her harvest before the first frost, Thomas showed up at dawn with tools and stayed until the last sheaf was gathered. When young Billy Harper got thrown from his horse and broke his leg 5 miles from town, it was Thomas who heard the boy's cries, who rode out and carried him back, who sat with him through the night while the doctor set the bone. People whispered about him sometimes, wondering why a man like that never settled down, never claimed land of his own, never seemed to want anything for himself. Some said he was running from something. Others said he was searching for something. Thomas heard the whispers but never corrected them. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any of their guesses. He helped people because it was the only thing that made the weight in his chest feel lighter, because in the act of easing someone else's burden, he could briefly forget his own. Sarah Catherine Morrison arrived in Redemption Springs on a Tuesday in late September, stepping off the stagecoach with a single trunk and a letter from her cousin who had promised her work at the general store. She was 30 years old, unmarried, and carried herself with the particular kind of dignity that comes from having survived disappointments that would have broken lesser spirits. Back in St. Louis, she had been engaged to a banker's son, had planned a wedding, had believed in promises made in parlors and gardens. But promises, she had learned, were fragile things, easily broken when fortunes changed or when a man's family decided that love mattered less than social standing. She had come west not to escape, exactly, but to find a place where she could build a life on her own terms, where her worth would be measured by what she contributed rather than who her family was or how much dowry she brought. Her cousin Rachel ran the general store with her husband, and they had written that Redemption Springs was growing, that they needed help, that Sarah would be welcome. The welcome was genuine when she arrived, with Rachel embracing her tightly and her husband James shaking her hand with warmth. But Sarah could see in their eyes the same question everyone seemed to ask when they looked at a woman her age traveling alone. Why? She met Thomas Wade 3 days after her arrival. A windstorm had torn part of the roof off the store, and Rachel was frantic, trying to organize repairs while also managing customers and inventory. Sarah was standing on a ladder, attempting to nail a piece of canvas over the damaged section, when a quiet voice from below said, "Ma'am, that won't hold through the next rain. Let me help." She looked down to see a tall man with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He wore simple clothes, all of them clean but worn, and he held his hat in his hands with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed genuine rather than performative. Before she could respond, he was climbing up beside her, examining the damage with a practiced eye. He worked for 3 hours that afternoon, replacing broken boards, securing the canvas properly, checking the rest of the roof for weak spots. When he finished, he refused payment, tipping his hat to Sarah and Rachel before walking away into the lengthening shadows. "That's Thomas Wade," Rachel said, watching him go. "He's been here longer than most, and he's helped just about everyone at some point. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but he always shows up when someone needs him." Sarah found herself thinking about him more than she expected in the days that followed. She would see him in town, always moving with purpose, always seeming to be on his way to help someone with something. She watched him spend an entire afternoon teaching a young boy how to properly care for his horse. She saw him carry supplies for Mrs. Chen, the laundress who was recovering from a bad fall. She noticed how he never drew attention to his kindness, how he seemed almost embarrassed when people thanked him. Their second real conversation happened at the town well on a Saturday morning. Sarah was drawing water when the rope snapped, sending the bucket plummeting into the darkness below. She stood there, frustrated and trying to figure out how to retrieve it, when Thomas appeared with a coil of rope over his shoulder. "Happens more often than it should," he said quietly. "Town council keeps meaning to replace the whole system, but there's always something more pressing." He tied a weight to his rope and lowered it carefully, fishing for the lost bucket. "You're Sarah Morrison. Rachel's cousin from St. Louis." "I am," she said, surprised that he knew. "And you're Thomas Wade. The man everyone relies on." A flicker of something, discomfort maybe, crossed his face. "I just help where I can." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it, more direct than she had intended. He was silent for a long moment, his hands working the rope with steady precision. "Because someone helped me once. When I needed it most. And I didn't have any way to pay them back, so I figured I'd pay it forward instead." He pulled up the bucket, along with her lost one, and handed both to her. "Sometimes that's all we can do. Pass on the kindness we've been given." Something in his voice, in the way he looked at her with those quiet eyes, made Sarah feel like she was seeing beneath the surface to the man underneath. She wanted to ask more, to know what help he had received, what pain he carried that drove him to ease the pain of others. But he was already tipping his hat, already walking away, and she was left standing by the well with 2 buckets of water and a strange ache in her chest that she couldn't quite name. The autumn deepened, bringing cold winds and early frosts. Sarah settled into her new life, working at the store, learning the rhythms of the town, building friendships with the other women. But she found herself watching for Thomas, noticing when he was in town, observing the quiet way he moved through the world. She began to understand that his kindness was not just generosity but something deeper, a kind of redemption he was seeking through service to others. She started finding small ways to help him in return. She would set aside supplies she knew he would need for various projects, offering them at cost or sometimes refusing payment altogether. She began keeping a pot of coffee warm in the store on cold mornings, knowing he often passed by early. Once, when she saw him working on a broken wagon in the rain, she brought him hot soup and bread, standing with him in the downpour until he finally accepted it with a quiet thank you that seemed to contain multitudes. The crisis came in November, sudden and devastating. A fire started in the livery stable on a windy night, the flames spreading quickly through the dry wood. By the time the alarm was raised, half the building was engulfed. The horses inside were screaming, and the owner, a man named Dutch Calloway, was trying desperately to open the gates, but the lock had warped in the heat. Thomas was there before anyone else, running toward the flames while others ran away. Sarah, who had been in the store doing inventory when she saw the glow, arrived in time to see him kick down the gate and disappear into the smoke. Her heart seized in her chest. She watched, frozen, as he led one horse out, then another, then went back in. The roof was starting to sag, beams cracking with sounds like gunshots. People were shouting for him to stop, that it was too dangerous, but he went back in again. This time, when he emerged with the last horse, a beam collapsed behind him. The force of it threw him forward, and he fell hard, rolling to extinguish the sparks on his clothes. Men rushed forward to pull him clear, and Sarah found herself running, pushing through the crowd until she reached him. His face was black with soot, his hands burned, one arm bleeding from where debris had cut him. But he was alive, conscious, his eyes meeting hers with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You could have died," she said, her voice shaking. "All those horses, they're not worth your life." He coughed, wincing, and she saw the pain he was trying to hide. "They were terrified," he said simply. "I couldn't leave them." The doctor patched him up in his office while half the town waited outside. Sarah stayed, insisting on helping, and the doctor didn't argue. She cleaned the burns on Thomas's hands with gentle precision, wrapped the wound on his arm, watched his face for signs of pain he wouldn't voice. When the doctor stepped out to speak with Dutch Calloway, she found herself alone with Thomas in the quiet room, the smell of smoke still clinging to both of them. "You do this for everyone," she said softly. "You put yourself last. You give everything away. But who takes care of you, Thomas?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a wall lowering just slightly. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "Years ago. We grew up on a ranch in Texas, just the two of us and my father after our mother died. My father was a hard man, believed in taking care of your own and no one else. When a neighbor's ranch was struggling, my father refused to help, said it wasn't our concern. My sister, she was kinder than anyone I've known. She would sneak food to their children, help their mother with chores. Our father found out and he was furious. They had a terrible fight." He paused, and Sarah could see the memory playing behind his eyes. She rode out that night, angry and hurt. Storm came in fast, one of those sudden ones that turn the world sideways. Her horse threw her crossing a flooded creek. They found her the next morning. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I was 15. My father never spoke about it, just got harder and meaner. I left as soon as I was old enough, and I swore I would never be like him. Never refuse help when someone needed it. Never put pride or convenience before another person's suffering." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, understanding now the weight he carried, the debt he was trying to repay that could never truly be settled. "Thomas," she said, covering his bandaged hand with hers. "Your sister's death wasn't your fault. And this life you're living, this constant giving, it's beautiful, but you don't have to do penance forever." "I know," he said, but she could hear in his voice that he didn't, not really. "But I don't know any other way to be." She sat with him until the doctor returned, and then she walked with him to his small room behind the blacksmith shop, making sure he had everything he needed. Over the following weeks, as he healed, she found reasons to check on him, bringing meals, changing bandages, simply sitting with him in companionable silence. He protested at first, uncomfortable with being the one receiving care, but gradually he seemed to accept it, even welcome it. Something was changing between them, Sarah could feel it. The way he looked at her now held a different quality, a kind of wonder mixed with uncertainty. The way she found herself thinking about him, worrying about him, wanting to be near him, had transformed from admiration into something deeper and more frightening. One evening in December, as the first snow was falling, she found him on the porch of the general store, watching the white flakes drift down in the lamplight. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. I was supposed to be married, she said suddenly, surprising herself. Back in St. Louis. To a man I thought I loved. But when his family lost money in a bad investment, suddenly I wasn't suitable anymore. The wedding was cancelled. The promises were broken. Everyone looked at me with pity, like I was damaged goods. Thomas turned to her, his eyes intent. You're not damaged. You're here, building a new life. That takes more courage than staying would have. I came here thinking I needed to prove I could be fine on my own, she continued. That I didn't need anyone. But that's not quite true, is it? We all need people. We all need connection. The question is finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and stays anyway. Sarah, he said her name like a prayer. I see you. I see your strength and your kindness and the way you notice things other people miss. I see how you help your cousin without being asked, how you remember everyone's names, how you brought me soup in the rain. I see you, and I don't know how to be good enough for someone like you. She set down her coffee and took his hand, the one still healing. You've been alone so long, carrying this burden, that you've forgotten something important. Being good enough isn't about being perfect or never needing help. It's about showing up honestly, about letting someone choose you as much as you choose them. She looked directly into his eyes. I'm choosing you, Thomas Wade. If you'll have me. The silence stretched between them, full of possibility. Then slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid she might vanish, Thomas reached up and touched her face with his unbandaged hand. I don't have much, he said. No land, no real home. Just my horse and my willingness to work. I don't need much, she replied. Just honesty and loyalty and someone who understands that kindness isn't weakness. She leaned closer. I see the man you are. The one who runs into burning buildings and fixes broken roofs and teaches boys how to care for horses. And I see the man underneath all that, the one who's been alone too long. I want both. I want all of you. When he kissed her, it was gentle and tentative and full of a hope he had forgotten how to feel. The snow fell around them, covering the rough edges of the town in softness, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thomas felt like maybe, just maybe, he deserved this small piece of happiness. They were married in the spring, in a simple ceremony at the church with the whole town in attendance. Dutch Calloway gave Sarah away, insisting it was the least he could do for the woman who was marrying the man who had saved his horses. Rachel cried happy tears. The children Thomas had helped over the years brought wildflowers. And when the preacher asked if anyone objected, the silence was full of blessing rather than doubt. Thomas and Sarah built their life together slowly and deliberately. They claimed a small piece of land on the edge of town and built a modest house with their own hands and the help of friends who had been waiting years to finally repay Thomas's kindness. He continued to help people, but now Sarah helped alongside him, the two of them becoming a team that the town relied on. She taught him that accepting help wasn't weakness, and he taught her that there was strength in choosing to care even when it cost you something. They had hard days, as all couples do, times when old fears and hurts resurfaced. But they faced them together, with honesty and patience and the kind of loyalty that grows from truly seeing each other. Thomas learned, slowly, that he didn't have to earn love through endless service, that Sarah chose him simply for who he was. And Sarah learned that the love she had thought was lost to her in St. Louis had simply been waiting for the right person, the right heart, to claim it. Years later, when people told the story of Thomas Wade and Sarah Morrison, they spoke of kindness rewarded, of loyalty returned, of two lonely souls finding home in each other. But Sarah, when she overheard such talk, would smile and shake her head. It wasn't reward or transaction, she would say. It was recognition. She had seen in Thomas the same quiet strength she possessed, the same determination to build something good from disappointment. And he had seen in her the same truth, that the heart that endures can also heal, that the person who has survived loss knows the true value of what they find. On summer evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, their hands intertwined, their silence comfortable and full. Thomas still helped people, still showed up when someone needed him. But now, when he came home, there was someone waiting, someone who saw him not as a hero or a helper but simply as a man, flawed and whole and worthy of love. And Sarah, who had traveled west looking for a place to belong, had found something better than belonging. She had found partnership, had found a person whose silent loyalty matched her own, whose heart beat in rhythm with hers. The dust still rose in small clouds when the cattle moved through the canyon pass. The wind still carved lines into faces and the sun still beat down on the hard land. But in that small house on the edge of Redemption Springs, two people had built something that endured against the hardness, something gentle and strong and true. They had found each other in a place where the frontier met civilization, and together they had proven that the greatest courage wasn't in facing down danger alone, but in opening your heart to another person and trusting them to stay. In the end, that was the real redemption, not in the springs that gave the town its name, but in the simple, profound act of choosing love in a world that often felt too harsh for such tender things.